So the security arms race, OWASP top 10. This is going to be a technical session. We're going to be talking a little bit about PHP, some XML. I may be professing undying love for various parts of. So does this sound, too technical for anybody in this room? Is everyone okay with that so far? No hands up. Everyone's good. Okay. So just a couple things. There's slide numbers up at the top. So if you have questions, just remember what slide number it is, and we'll flip back to it. And you guys could grill me afterwards. And you don't need to take photos. The slides are already online. You could grab them there from my Vanity URL. And speaking of Vanity, that's my name, Tash Siparison. Bit 79 is my company, but don't worry about that. None of you are going to hire me. What you want to pay attention to is my Magento Security podcast. I try to post fairly regularly about security stuff, and it's going to be taking off a little bit more in May when I get started. But that's, enough preliminaries, let's stop wasting time. Actually, speaking about wasting time, let's talk about a little story. In 2013, IBM gave a lot of money to the Ponemon Institute. And they've been doing this every year since 2013. And what the Ponemon Institute has been charged with doing is preparing average costs of data breach for organizations around the world. And a chart is coming up here, and I promise it's the only chart I have. But I really wanted to share this with you guys. I know some of you are thinking, what could this number be? This is the average cost of data breaches for organizations for the last 3 years. That's $6.53 million US for 2015. And we could just assume it's going to be even more for 2016. What's even more scary is the conclusion they came to. While the cost of data breach stayed relatively constant, the retail sector experienced a significant increase. That kind of applies to us and everybody else who's doing e-commerce around the world. We're the ones driving the cost of data breaches increasing. And follow me with an analogy for 1 minute. If we think of data breaches as, say, an illness, this is the cost of the cure. After you've been infected, this is how much it costs businesses, on average, to come back from it. And if we keep going with this medical analogy, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's talk about the cheaper alternative of using preventative tactics to defend our e-commerce stores. And, well, where do we start? Obviously, with the low-hanging fruit, the riskiest things that we could have put into our site. And how do we figure out what the biggest risks are? Luckily for us, the security community has done all the research already, and it's provided it to us for free. And it's the OWASP Top 10. I'm not sure if you recognize that cover, but what the OWASP Top 10 is a flagship publication of the OWASP Foundation. It lists the top 10 most common and severe vulnerabilities that exist in web applications, not necessarily e-commerce applications, but all web applications. And this is not some random list thrown together. It's rooted in the vulnerability data that was donated to the OWASP Foundation by security companies and selflessly analyzed by thousands of volunteer security professionals. In many ways, the OWASP Foundation is the unsung heroes of web security. And I think I should say that they do not endorse this talk, nor do they certify compliance of the Magento platform. We're just using their top 10 to look at what vulnerabilities may exist in our code and defend against them. But, this is what we're going to do. We're going to quickly run through the top 10 so we all know what they are. And then we'll look at the features that exist in Magento 2 to help us defend against them. This is going to be mostly Magento 2 focused talk. Some of these features exist in Magento 1. You're free to investigate those, but I'm not doing Magento 1 ever again. So, all in Magento 2. Let's not waste time. Number 1, injection. Before we go on, if you notice on the right side here, these are the numbers came up by OWASP. It kind of gives you some more details of each of the top 10. Easy exploitability means that the attacker doesn't have to jump through a lot of hoops to attack your site via this method. Prevalence is, how often we see it happening. And detectability means how easy it is for an attacker to see this sort of problem on your site. And obviously, impact, you want to tackle the most impactful, the most severe ones first. And there's a reason injection is at the top of the list, is because it's just so damn severe and it's just so common. And in the context of PHP applications or e-commerce, obviously it's called SQL injection. And is there anyone here who does not know what SQL injection looks like? So then everyone's seen this. And no one needs an explanation of this guy with a funny name, right? I know I shouldn't be talking, but drop table students is a concatenation that breaks the database. So we'll just skip over that and get into the more fun parts of the OWASP Top 10, the ones that you may not have covered. So broken authentication and session management happens when an attacker comes in through the front door. It's that your site cannot differentiate between an authorized regular user and an attacker. And this happens in many ways. And usually I represent a regular user by a laptop, and the server is the grid. And most users just have a cookie that authenticates them or a session ID that authenticates them. If an attacker gets a hold of that cookie or session ID, then they'll just be able to just walk right in through the front door, and the server does not know the difference because it uses that cookie to authenticate the user. And this is extremely common. And you may be thinking, how does the attacker get the cookie? Sometimes it's just by XSS. XSS is another of the top 10, and many of these vulnerabilities are usually chained together to execute a full data breach. So someone may use XSS just to get the cookie. And let me show you how XSS works. Let's say you have a website, okay? The definition of XSS is unauthorized scripts running on your site. Let's say you have a website, shopping cart, and an attacker was able to put a script on your site and have it execute on a browser. That's what XSS is. And I think the easiest way to really communicate how XSS works is to talk about Sami Kamka. And it's just going to be a quick little story. Back in the days of MySpace, Sami Kamka did not have much friends. So what he did is he created a JavaScript string that he posted on his MySpace page. And what it did is that anyone who viewed that made that person's browser automatically friend Sami. And it copied that same JavaScript string on their page. And within 24 hours, Sami had 1 million friends. And MySpace had to shut down. And I think he was banned from the internet for 3 years or something. So XSS, as you can see, there's a reason it's up there, because it is dangerous. But we're going to keep moving on. We have 10 to cover, okay? Insecure direct object references. How this works is, let's say we have a URL. Some of you may recognize this. Magento 2, you're editing your address. Obviously, your address here is 52. The address 53 may not belong to you, but if I change that URL in my browser, I should not be able to access any details of this address. It may seem common sense, but an attacker just last month was able to compromise or demonstrate a compromise of millions of Instagram accounts using this as one of their attack methods. So while we may joke, it's like, oh yeah, that's easy to prevent, it is still something that developers slip up on a fairly often basis. We're going halfway there. Security misconfiguration. And this is a big one. This is a general risk. How security misconfiguration works is, we have an attacker just attacking every part of your application stack. Something is not configured right. And my second point here, attack to unnecessary features. And I'll talk a little bit of a example that we may be familiar with. Who here has heard of MAGME? Right, yes. So MAGME is an unnecessary feature that a lot of stores had run on their production servers, and it just sat there. And it was vulnerable. So that MAGME attack that we've seen a couple of years ago was an attack. It was an attack on an unnecessary feature that shouldn't have been there. And the more unnecessary features you have on your site, it's a greater surface of attack. There's more places for an attacker to break in. So we enter the second half. Sensitive data exposure. This one is a little bit less prevalent, but the impact is severe. The thing about sensitive data exposure is what happens is data is exposed in the middle, and it usually happens from a man-in-the-middle attack. If you don't know what a man-in-the-middle attack is, It's, again, we have a regular user communicating with a server, and an attacker somehow is able to just get in there and read the data or intercept the data back and forth. And he doesn't necessarily need to be physically in the network middle. He could be in a coffee shop sniffing Wi-Fi, or he could be, coming out of a data center where some governments, some oppressive governments have, stolen data coming out of servers that were going to their citizens. I'm not going to name countries, but it's a fairly dangerous situation. Missing function level access control. I'm just going to run over this one quickly. It's similar to indirect object references where we changed 52 to 53, and we were able to access an address that should not have been able to see. But it's a little bit different. It relies on forced browsing, where the attacker just goes in and just tries URLs they know would exist. So let's say an attacker has an account on your site, but he tries the admin URLs and try to hit the admin URLs and maybe access something which does not have the proper admin ACLs in place. And, one level of protection will protect some pages, but if he could find his way across to a URL he knows exists, that's the privilege, that's the level of privilege he should not have. And usually you'll see like logs for ASP pages or Ruby pages on your Magento website. And there's a reason for that, because the attackers just automate the probes to just hit your URL and just try everything. And if something pops up, if they could get access to one admin page or something that has no ACL set up in place, then you're vulnerable to this risk. Moving on to A8, and this is a fun one. Now, mind you, the OWASP Top 10 was created in 2013. Well, it was created decades ago, and it's last been updated in 2013. A8 was not as common before 2013, but cross-site request forgery has been increasing. So I suspect the next time OWASP revises their top 10, this will move up. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time here to explain how cross-site request forgery works, because it's a little bit more complicated. We've got a same setup. We've got a client, we've got a server, they're trying to access some pages. It's not necessarily a blocked page or anything. And an attacker comes along. And he takes a look at your website, takes a look at your server, and he looks at the forms that you have going on. And your web server is just going to give it to him because it shows it's public. And then what the attacker does is he creates another website, an evil website. You can see it's got horns. That means it's evil. And in it, there's a little bit of JavaScript in there. Okay? And he sends that to an authenticated user. So the website may have, cats or something, or animated GIF of cats, just so it spends, the authenticator user spends time looking at it. And silently, out of the frame, where the authenticator user cannot see, the attacker is aware of what the form post is like. So he makes his JavaScript post to the site that the authenticator user is logged into. And this could be extremely dangerous, because if you create some custom forms in Magento and you don't protect against CSRF, the attacker could execute those on behalf of an admin user. So say, obviously this is not a vulnerability in Magento. Let's say they create an admin user by posting a form that they shouldn't be, okay? We'll get back to CSRF when we talk about the defenses against it a little bit further. But let's roll up the last two. A9, using components with known vulnerabilities. There's something called a CVE list, common vulnerabilities and exploits. And it lists the vulnerabilities that exist in various versions of sites. And if you're using, say, an older version of Apache, an older version of Varnish, or something with an existing vulnerability, then, obviously, you're vulnerable. There's not much more to say about that. There's a reason why it's A9, it's so low down. Detectability is left difficult because sometimes it's hard to tell what versions of software someone's running. But when you can tell it, you can see the prevalence is widespread. It's very easy to script a search and find out who's running a vulnerable version of say, even Magento. And then figure out how to attack it. But as I said, detectability is difficult, and there's a reason why this is low down on the list. And the last one, A10, Unvalidated redirects and forwards. How this works is we have a redirect. It takes a parameter, and it just redirects to that parameter. In truth, I think the OWASP is just grasping at straws here. This because there's not much you could do about this, and most big companies who have bug bounties, they don't even offer bounties for this sort of vulnerability. So that's the top 10. Now what I want to do is change pace a little bit. Let's look at what's built into Magento 2 that we could use to defend against these. And I'm going to cover some things that may seem obvious to some of you, but I've seen this break or been coded badly in so many Magento 1 extensions that I think it's a good idea to just highlight them as we start building Magento 2 customizations and modules and extensions. And the first one is not hand-coding SQL queries. I have seen hand-coded SQL queries in so many extensions or custom code that I've encountered in my 8 years doing Magento that it's depressing. So my point is, like, I'd encourage you to use the Magento 2 ORM. There's resource models and collections, which may be a little bit difficult to understand sometimes for a newbie developer, and it's easier to just hand code your SQL, but you're hand coding risky SQL. It's better to just rely on the Magento 2 ORM to do its job for you, and it provides you, and you spend the time learning it because it provides you the ability to do server-side validation very neatly in your models before the data gets into your database. And if you notice, this protects against 2 of the top 10, SQL injection and XSS. And I'm going to have this list as we talk about the defenses, so you can see that some defensive practices in Magento will defend against a whole host of the top 10, okay? And another nice thing while we're talking about Magento database access, and before I switch slides, some of you guys are not going to like the next slide, but I ask you to bear with me for 1 second. I think we all owe EAV a little bit of love, you know? I know there's a lot of moaning and groaning when EAV returned to Magento 2, but EAV, by its nature, forces you to think about what types of data are going into which tables. And if a developer is thinking about that, he's also thinking about typecasting. And that means he's also thinking about not letting a JavaScript XSS attack get into an int field. So while EAV may be difficult to work with, I think we all owe it a little bit of appreciation for the fact that it makes you think a little bit more securely and pay attention to the aspects of your site that may be vulnerable. And you know, you're free to disagree with me on this, but I still love EAV, okay? Talking about typecasting is important to make sure that nothing gets into your database for XSS and injection. Zend has very good typecasting libraries, and I encourage you to look those up. I should have put the link to the path to the files here. Just be aware if you're going to be typecasting datetime, Magento has overridden in Magento 2 the Zend datetime typecasting class. So feel free to look those up and use typecasting to make sure whatever data is coming in is the correct type. Then you're free to, you're preventing XSS attacks and injection attacks. But that's data coming in. Let's talk about data going back out. Let's say something is in your database going back out, okay? What everyone uses, and everyone's really familiar. I think I have a, no, I don't have a laser. Everyone's familiar with the double underscore, you know, internationalization, you know. You drop in the double underscore there, nobody writes templates nowadays without that double underscore to translate variables. But there's another interesting function called escape HTML. What this does, and it's part of the escaper class that you could find at that path. When you escape the HTML, it strips out various types of XSS attacks. And you may be thinking, well, if we're preventing XSS to come in using, you know, the ORM and, you know, checking and typecasting, why are we preventing it from going out? This is the defense in depth principle. We don't know where probably some data has got into a database. It may have come from a Magento 1 installation that we're migrating to. It may have come from, you know, just a crappy API extension that, you know, someone's sending API requests to our site that we've had to install. So it's important for us to defend at every level. Defend data coming in and defend data going back out. And I encourage you to look at this escaper class because while escape HTML only really works for HTML, it's called escape HTML, there's also an escape URL function in this class, and you could escape various things to make sure that you're not taking embedded XSS attacks in your database and giving them to the user. So take a look at that class, and I'm sure you'll find fun stuff in there. While we're on templates, let's talk about anti-forgery tokens. This is something that I honestly may have seen about twice or 3 times, grabbing free modules off the internet for work with Magento 1. Anti-forgery tokens defend against CSRF. They are the one and only standard defense against CSRF. And I'll go back to CSRF a bit so we explain how it works. But I just wanted to show you quickly the simple one line you drop into a form in your templates. That's literally all you need to do, and probably check for it in your post actions on your controller. But what this does is, let's just explain CSRF first. So remember, the attacker is creating a JavaScript that will post to your server, okay? The attacker knows what are in the form fields. But if you have, and this is a list of form fields that I grabbed from Firefox. And if you notice the top one there says form key. This form key is a unique random string per session, okay? So Magento's got this feature built in. It'll generate this for you, and it will validate it for you also in the controller post actions. And since this form key is unique per session, the attacker does not know what an authenticated user's form key actually is. So they'll be able to fake a post to the server, but the server's going to refuse it because the form key is either wrong or missing. And using the anti-forgery tokens in Magento templates is your one and only standard defense that you could really lock down CSRF attacks. And I encourage you to use it on any form that you create for custom code in Magento. The validator for the form key is located in, it's in my speaker notes, libinternal Magento framework. So you'll be able to find the validator class there, and that will have functions to make sure that your form key comes back properly. I believe there's a little bit of work in Magento 2 to make sure that your form keys, which are unique per user, meshes well with Varnish. So not 100% sure exactly how it works because I haven't gotten there yet, but I have heard from Alan Kent that that feature exists. Let's keep moving. Some fun stuff, no more default admin paths, and the downloader is gone. Because we all know, I've had just a personal story last year. Someone DDoSed one of my sites downloader when I got to Imagine I was ready to go have alcohol. So, all of these default paths are gone. It's still security by obscurity, but still it's one more hurdle we throw in front of any attacker that tries to get into our site. And if they can't find the admin, maybe they just give up, Not bulletproof, but an excellent and welcome addition. One thing to be aware of, developers I've seen installing Magento 2, the first thing they do is when they see admin underscore and some random string, they just remove it and make an admin. And I've put a stamp down on that. There's no more of that. And if you notice, it helps defend against a bunch of the top 10. Moving on, cookie permissions. I don't know if anyone's has experience working with the HTTP only flag. What this does, and it only works for modern browsers, it helps prevent against broken authentication in that when the HTTP only flag is set on cookies, JavaScript cannot access it. Only the browser could deliver that cookie back to the server. So that means someone executing an XSS attack would not be able to read the admin cookie. And it's set by default on a couple of the most important cookies in Magento 2. But I'd encourage you, if you're building a single sign-on or something like this, pay attention to the flags. And if you need access to these cookies via the script, via JavaScript, be very careful before switching off HTTP only on these cookies. You can switch it off from the admin, and luckily there's a big red warning, a small red warning sign there. But I suggest you never switch this off unless you know exactly what you're doing. Hand in hand with HTTP only is the secure flag. When a cookie has a secure flag set on it, the browser will not deliver that cookie via an unencrypted session. So that means, remember the man-in-the-middle attack? He will not be able to read the admin cookie because the admin cookie is only delivered via an encrypted session. And it's set for these 2 cookies, probably a couple more. If you're building something custom in Magento and you need this sort of functionality, I'd suggest you use these flags. There's very easy functions that set these flags on any custom cookies you're using. Can't remember exactly which file it is right now. But yeah, pay attention to where these flags are set on the existing cookies, and I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out. Moving on, customer sessions. I have seen so many developers try to roll their own way of figuring out which customer is logged in. And it's just painful to look at. And I think if you need to figure out who's logged in and who they are, just use the customer session object. It's really easy to use. This is a controller where it's set up, but you should use the customer session to authenticate the user at every level. Do it at the model, do it at the block, do it in the helpers, because you don't know where anything is being requested from. So if a helper needs to get data from a customer, make sure, and if it needs to be that customer logged in, make sure you use the customer session object. This is how it's used in a controller. Speaking about rolling your own authentication, don't roll your own crypto. I've seen a couple modules where people try to do all sorts of funny encrypted stuff to store API keys or passwords to payment gateways, and they're never always properly done. No one, I don't know if anyone here is a cryptographer. I'm definitely not a cryptographer, and I'm not going to write my own crypto. I'm not going to roll my own crypto. I refuse to take that sort of responsibility. Luckily, Magento has a model that will encrypt data to save in the database. So if you have a sensitive API key for your payment gateway, just use this, and this is the system XML setup. Just use this model, and it will save your sensitive data in an encrypted form in the database. Yes, it's symmetric encryption, and yes, if an attacker gets a hold of your code or your encryption key, they'll be able to break it. But it's, as I said, it's one more hurdle. If an attacker just reads your database, they'd never be able to figure out what your sensitive data is. And as a bonus, this little thing here, obscure, makes the dots instead of typing, so you defend against someone looking over your shoulder. Okay, and we're coming up to the end here. Remember defending against vulnerable components. If you have an old version of PHP, an old version of Magento, that an exploit is readily available on the web for, it's kind of obvious that you're vulnerable. With the introduction of Composer and knowing how Composer JSON rules work and employing proper use of semantic versioning, we can now have fully patched minor versions of the packages we need, and Composer helps us keep that up to date. So if you're building something new for Magento 2, and you need a standard library, don't drop the code into your module. Use Composer. Build the JSON rules properly, and you'll always have the latest patched version of the latest patched minor version of the code that you need. I really, really like Composer. This was actually sorely needed in Magento 1. And the fact that we have it now would solve a lot of vulnerable components that exist in the code base. And this is the last slide. And some of you may recognize this page. I actually took the screenshot when it was version 2.02. It's a nice, clean slate, right? There's nothing here. If there was a patch that was needed, it'd probably just be one line that says, hey, you know what? You're running version 2.01. You need to get up to 2.02. This page is clean now. I know you guys are brilliant developers, and no matter what Magento does, you'll find a way to put advertising for your module or every single plugin you build and every single minor version, and just drop it in there. Yeah, I know you guys could do it, okay? But what you do by filling this with junk is you're desensitizing the mom and pop shops who rely on this to know that there's a new version of Magento. So this is my personal plea. Just don't fill this with junk. Just leave it for Magento security. And this way, Thanks. And this way, we have, the small mom and pop shops just staying up to date and not being bombarded with every version of every plugin that you make. But yeah, I didn't mean to end on such a sad note, but but yeah, that's it. If you need more help, the forums are there. Feel free to reach out to me on forums. My avatar is a white polar bear because I'm from Canada and I'm a fuzzy. Magento Stack Exchange, excellent resource. And OWASP.org has tons of resources. Feel free to go there. There's code, there's tons of tools. There's much more articles. They even have a podcast. It's nowhere near as fun as Mage Talk. Actually, I don't even listen to it. I listen to Mage Talk. And feel free to reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions. I'll probably get back to you pretty quickly. You could DM me if it's private. I've got open DMs. But with that, thank you for your attention. And any questions, feel free.